It took us 5 minutes to clean a fryer that had not been cleaned
ever.
Weeks. We like to say weeks. There was some distance between the last cleaning. I think that's the technical term, in distance. Yeah. But
like when it was bought.
Yeah. when it was plugged in the first time.
This is Restauranttopia. Welcome back to Restauranttopia. We got a great episode, very important episode for you today. We have my buddy Brian Seitz. How you doing?
Good, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing great. And we have a special guest today. We have Peter Kirwan of Halcyon Eco, all the way over from Ireland here in beautiful Cleveland, Ohio, to talk a little bit about making oil clean, making kitchens safer, and a little bit about that story. So, Peter, thanks for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, kind of want to start a little bit about like how you got into this in the beginning. Like, how did Halcyon start?
Yeah, I suppose Halcyon started, if I go back to a little bit of history of myself, I had a small tech company in Ireland, and I sold the tech company.
Got it.
I had a young family, and I was a single father, not a separated father, father. I was a single father. So I had 3 children. So I decided that I would become a dad rather than someone who appeared every now and again. I took the family into rural Ireland, bought a nice house. Then after about 2 weeks, I decided that I wasn't good at this enough for me.
I didn't see it going there. 2 weeks?
I thought, this is a bad idea. Something bad could happen to these children if I stay here any longer. So I actually went and I got a nanny.
Okay.
And I said, look, I brought a nanny, There, you mind them. I was approached by a company that was failing, and they asked me would I come on board as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
I then decided, well, look, I need to get back in. I want to be doing something. I have a few pounds. I'm going to buy this company for the debt associated with it. Okay. So I bought the company for its debt for €1. That was the origin of where Halcyon started. They had a few nice customers. I knew I could exploit that customer base. My whole career before then was pure sales.
Yeah.
Sales.
Yeah.
I knew I could exploit that customer base. Within a very short period of time, we were turning over 7-8 million euros literally within about 16 months.
Wow.
The challenge then is when your business is growing that fast, how do you manage that growth? And as we were trying to figure it out, the financial crash 2008 came, kicked us right in the head.
Yeah.
We had to then sit back and figure out very, very quickly, how are we going to rescue this company? So we handed back, literally overnight, emails went out handing back about 6 million in contracts.
Wow.
Back to customers that were stretching it to 60 days, that we were a little bit concerned. In fact, a week after we got paid, one of them went into liquidation.
Oh, wow.
And they went into liquidation for a very short period of time just so they could screw
somebody else over,
Yeah. So we were very fortunate. We were able to protect the jobs, keep the staff safe. That then meant that we had to pivot the company. We had to look at a way, how do we protect this company? We brought consultants in and we were looking at becoming a facility management company. And they advised against it. They said there's no room for a middle ground facility management company. You're either very big, dominating the marketplace, or you're very small with a very niche sector, but you can't sit in the middle of facility management. They advised us to become a customer of the facility management companies. And that's where the whole specialist side of the business. So we very quickly grew the brand into be the biggest in Ireland and the UK. We became HVAC specialists, which is your TR19. We became water tank specialists. We became grease extract specialists. All those jobs that no one else wanted to. We became experts at.
Yeah.
The top 5 facility management companies, now we were ingrained in their business process. We had some £1 million companies. So we had rebuilt the whole company back to where it was after the 2008 crash. And COVID came along. COVID came along. And look, I was in the same position as everybody was. This was unknown. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what the end was going to be. Because we were a specialist company and we had a decontamination unit, we became a frontline company. So we were the companies that were out there decontaminating areas, getting businesses up and running. We very quickly realized doing this that we kind of phrased the snake oil cleaner, right? And we took it from the old days of the snake oil medicine. Some of our customers were being charged like just eye-watering amounts of money, and I'm sure it was the same here.
Sure,
We saw it.
Yeah, we decided we would offer our service. We realized COVID was a moment in time, and it wasn't a long-term business strategy for the business. So why don't we have a bit of fun while we're doing this and give away the services for free?
Oh, wow.
And we'll put these snake oil guys out of business. So we won multiple awards. I won Businessman of the Year award, and we had a lot of fun. That allowed us move out of COVID with a huge amount of credibility. We were then left in a position again, we need to pivot the company again. How do we protect the company from this type of thing ever happening again?
Right.
We have these thousands of customers. We had global ambitions. So how do we make our service at the time couldn't be exported overseas? So how do we make ourselves into a global entity? Oil filtration. We went out and we spoke to hundreds of our customers, and we kept coming back to the same scenario. Yes, there were oil filtration machines out there. They weren't credible. They weren't built with the right materials. They weren't safe. So we went out and we literally bought 10 of our competitors' machines, and we looked at the weaknesses within those machines. We also looked at the user. So we had to very quickly identify there's a difference between the user and the buyer. How do we connect?
It's true.
How do we connect the user and the buyer into the same ecosphere, essentially? So we made the machine into an AI machine. The AI now in the machine communicates with an app. It records the usage. It records when it's used. It communicates with the owner to let the owner know whether or not his technology is being used.
And that's a great point, because it's making me think now, because, not to spoiler alert, but Brian and I have demoed this machine, and you've come in and shown us how this works. And we'll get into how this is going to work for everybody's restaurant. But the fact that you thought about that actually connects all the dots in my brain of what you came up with, because we were saying it, like every little thing has a solution. And you know what I mean? Where we've seen other solutions for oil filtration, they don't. You know what I mean? But you've kind of like got, every time you turn around to look, okay, well, what could happen here? Safety here, this here, it's all handled. So that, I feel like that's a great, like, I didn't think of it that way, but connecting that buyer with the user.
Oh, yeah.
That's how you did it. I mean, there's no question.
We did, David. And even people question why we invested so heavily in a wireless technology for the handling. The wireless technology was developed because we watched someone use a machine and balance the wand on the fryer, walk away. We then watched the wand slip off the fryer and saturate. Now, luckily, no one got hurt, but saturate the whole kitchen in 250-degree oil. That's crazy.
Yeah. Imagine if 2 or 3 people are standing around and when it goes wild.
Or if someone wanted to use it as a weapon, or, do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's the type of thing where, from a health and safety perspective, it has to be taken more serious. That there is, 300 degrees. It's, if you burn yourself, it's going to be a 3rd degree burn. If you drop the canister you're carrying, you're shutting down the kitchen for the whole day. If there's a guy standing beside you and spray him with the oil. An example in Ireland was, they used to put the boiling hot oil into buckets. So they pour it into the bucket, they carry the bucket out. Of course, the chef went out when they sat on the bucket had melted slightly, fell through the bucket, 3rd degree burns all over. Insurance company was involved, everybody was involved at the time. So, we spent a lot of time really looking at every single incident, every single accident. How do we stop these things from happening? And how do we save money?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, just remember, vegetable oil now is nearly as expensive as gold. The war in Ukraine has shot it through the roof. You're not buying, you can't really buy vegetable oil by the bucket now, probably for $2 or $3.
Yeah.
And you have to remember that people now, they're taking very good oil and just pouring it in a bin. You might as well be opening your wallet and throwing it out of your wallet. So people need to understand from a health service, from a quality of food, from the protection of their staff. This is no longer a might have. It's a must have. And even not with us, but just it is a must have. If you don't have something in your kitchen to allow this, you don't care about the quality of your food, you don't care about the safety of your staff. The job of removing that oil and cleaning that fryer, that is the single most hated job in it.
Well, and I was going to level set here because, when you talk about oil filtration and, everybody listening to this podcast is in the restaurant business. At some point, they've probably done this job, and it's probably one of the most hated. Like there's plenty of like bets and rock, paper, scissors and let's, who pulls the short straw, to do that job, but when we, about a month ago or so, when we actually demoed that product, it's really, you've taken a job that like nobody wanted and almost, I hate to say, almost made it fun. You almost, made it like something that, maybe it's going the other way, that people are fighting over to do the job, versus not do it.
But it removes the boil out, the fact that customers are still using a boil out method. All it takes is for somebody to leave water in that fire, fill it up with oil, switch it on, allow it get to a blast point. And the person standing over that fire is going to receive 3rd-degree burns. If you've used chemical, which a lot of places still do, if you use chemical and it's not cleaned out properly, you're now left with that taste on your food. And especially your fryer. How many fryers have I seen where the owner believes the fryer's been cleaned, maintained, refilled? It's not, it's being topped up.
The genius of your product is multifaceted. The need is so big. I'm in kitchens weekly, and I always look at the fryer. I always have. It's just one of my things because you can kind of tell a lot about a restaurant.
Look at the fryer. I was in a restaurant last week. You could smell the fryer in the dining room.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
So everyone wants it to be clean, but they know that it's not being done because of the effort and the real world research that you did and your experience in the kitchen designed this product so much different than anything I've ever seen. And that's why I was so excited to have you on. And after seeing the demo, I was just blown away because that product needs to be in every kitchen across America. And it's not just for, large multinational, corporations. The local independent, who's our customer base and our listeners here, can get this product for their restaurant, keep their staff safe. Keep the oil clean
and save a ton of money.
Save money. But it's this whole like fallacy that people are cleaning it, topping it off and it's just as good as it was before. It's not. The food quality that you're putting out in the competitive restaurant space, which we all know is getting even more competitive. More people are entering the market. Your food quality is really key as to whether or not you're going to be around in 2 to 3 years. And the biggest thing, if you have fried food, is the quality of your oil. And you can, you can swap it out and replace the oil every 2 minutes, but that's not financially viable anymore. And your staff is probably doing more of that than you'd like. Why not clean the oil? And clean the fryer?
And you see, every kitchen and every member of staff within that kitchen needs to start understanding what acrylamide is.
Tell us a little bit more.
Let's talk about that.
The first time I found out about acrylamide was I was asked about it in front of our machine, and I didn't know what it was. So I had to walk through a YouTube and to research what is acrylamide, what are the health benefits, what are the health negatives for this. What acrylamide is it's a plastic-based product that gets created when you don't clean your fryer and it's constantly roasting those meat particles, potato particles especially. That turns into acrylamide, and it turns into acrylamide very, very quickly. What acrylamide does when it goes into your system, it's a cancer-causing contagion. So if you don't manage the level of acrylamides within your oil, you are slowly poisoning your customer base. And what we say to a lot of people is, if you pick up a chip, we've all picked up a chip and we've seen our fries, as you call them. We call them chips. And he looks at them.
Tomato. Freedom fries, right? Freedom fries.
We've all done it where there's a little black particle sitting on the chip. That is acrylamide.
Mm.
You know, so if you were in a restaurant, the biggest giveaway is that you can smell it.
Yeah.
Is a big thing. If you can smell their oil, right, that oil is burning every particle and every micron within that. And you are eating food that has been fried in that oil 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
You know, and that's what a lot of people don't realize. You know, when you walk into a restaurant, you should be thinking, I wonder how they manage the process of their vegetable oil within here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're on a massive education phase.
Yeah.
You know, California just brought in a law, then the federal government overturned it. Now there's a lot of research going on at federal level over acrylamide here in the States. From next year, you have to show how you manage your acrylamide levels within your fryer. And the answer is very simple. Filter your oil.
Yeah. So let's level set on what you're competing against. Traditionally, cleaning fryers. So, you know, I remember, again, the bucket, hopefully it's a steel bucket. Maybe not. You're buying the Homer bucket from, Home Depot.
Yeah.
You know, you might not last as long. Filtering into as basic as like a cone with a filter into the bucket and then putting it back in the fryer. You have you have some mobile units that'll suck it out and put it back in. You've got companies that do the big tanks.
Yeah.
You know, but that's and they're you're not even buying oil at that point. Well, you're buying the oil, but I'm saying you're not buying oil like you would from a distributor.
Yeah.
You're paying for that by the tank, and really probably don't have much see through to what's going on.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So how is yours different? So walk us through and maybe with some technology and just, so the listener can understand like, A to Z, like what, how you differ from that.
In the world of filtration, there's either very cheap, nasty knockoffs.
Yeah.
Your cone, you know. Again, anybody that's manually filtrating this boiling hot product and expecting their staff to do it into a pot that they're now going to lift up and pour back into the fryer. Not only that, what they don't realize is they're burning their thermostat. Yeah. So when their thermostat fails and the fryer won't start, it's because you've been pouring boiling hot oil in on top of it. They're very sensitive, those thermostats. And they exist for a reason within the fryer, stop you burning your restaurant down. And then you have the very expensive solution, your henny pennies. You could very easily spend $100,000 overnight within a henny penny. So we're sitting right in the middle. So what we're saying is we will create a cost-effective product with all the technology, with a 3-tiered filtration system, with filters, with magnesium. We will give all that to you, and we will do it within the region of $6,000. So now if you're opening in a restaurant, you can now buy a Pitco, buy our equipment for $10,000. So your capital investment, and on top of that, because you're sitting within the health and safety, you can recoup that 40% of the cost in the first year.
Yeah.
So now if you're a small restaurant owner and you're spending a lot of capital on your kitchen, you can now afford this technology at very cheap, whereas beforehand you were looking at very expensive solutions. Now look, there's the other side as well, where there's small machines. They're not FDA approved. They're being brought in from everywhere and anywhere. They're open top. They're built in with iron motors, which is a food grade, but the main thing for us is a 3-tiered filtration. We polish the oil. All our tech is wireless. It's 100% food grade, and it communicates with the app. We also supply you with a micron tester. So there's no longer just a sniff and guess as to whether my oil
so talk about that a little bit. What's this micron tester do?
There's an acceptable level that in your oil should never read more than 25 microns. That's a global acceptance in the States, in Europe. If you go to 26 microns, your oil is dirt. Right. So what the tester will do is, micron tester, it'll count the particles. Now, what we say to people is, look, it's your kitchen porter. He doesn't need to understand the science. So it's a traffic light system. He puts it in, red is dead.
Gotcha.
Green is fine.
Yeah.
And we've really brought it back to its basics. So there's no more, like we went into a restaurant and we let them fill their waste buckets with their oil and that they were going to dispose of. Now we're talking about £100 of oil.
Yeah.
What's cost $200 or $300 worth of oil. We tested it and it was only at 14 microns.
Yeah.
Right. They had another couple of days in that,
Mm-hmm.
but they had got into such a habit of, we change the oil on these days.
Right. Yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
And it's actually bringing science and transparency to the quality of the oil and how you're testing it and how you're doing in cleaning. Because before you just look at it and you go, all right, it's good, it's bad, or it's definitely bad because no one's done it. Now you have an objective way to test it and then an easy way to clean it. So you can constantly be doing this. And I really encourage the listeners to go on to restauranttopia.com, check out some of the demos. But to be able to do this at any level of your staff and then to track them to make sure that they're doing it is an absolute game changer. I think it's fascinating to me because now we all have SOPs and directives that we try to push onto our staff, but now it's easy to get done. Because when you're trying to say, all right, hey, we're going to pour a bucket of burning oil into a paper filter, and you just do that, 3 times a week, it may not even be done, every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have something that's easy to do, and you can track it, and it works.
Absolutely. And I was with a restaurateur this morning, an older guy, very funny guy. I won't give any names because he kept telling me.
He's listening for sure.
He kept telling me he was the most brilliant man on the planet, but very interesting.
Oh, I know that guy. Okay, I know. I've met him.
And I said, how do you test your oil? And he said, well, it's actually a generational thing. My grandfather passed it down to my father. My father passed it down to me. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, we look at it. And that's the problem. You can't look at oil and you can't smell it, and you can't do a shade test to see how clear it is.
No.
They're all just urban myths that you can do on that. The sniff and smell test, you have to move into the world of science.
I thought when you're frying something, like the food was done when it floats, right? Isn't that how, when I start, that's when it's done. I thought, yeah.
But if you're a restaurateur and your restaurant is filling with smoke, that's not your extract system that has stopped working.
Yeah.
That's not your oil that's burning.
Yeah.
That's the food particles within the oil that are burning. That's not because your kitchen porter has made the oil too hot. It's because you do not have a mechanism to make sure that your fryers are clean and safe.
Yeah.
And it all boils down to the quality of the food.
And it's the number one thing other than putting great food into the fryer is the oil and the cleanliness of it, and to make sure that gets cleaned over and over again. Because when you don't, the customer's going to expose you.
Absolutely.
They're going to see it in the French fries. They're going to see it in the deep fried chicken, the chicken wings, whatever it is. They're going to know that you use dirty oil.
Yeah.
And they may not cognitively say, hey, this is dirty oil, but they are going to say the food quality is not as good as it used to be.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to expose you that way. And that's what restaurateurs need to understand. And we all get why people try to cut corners. You got staffing issues. Your staff just doesn't want to do it, or you just don't have the staff to do it. And you don't want to invest in more oil.
Yeah.
So this is a mechanism that to me is a win-win, because it has the ability to make it easy to be clean, so your staff will do it, make it trackable, and it saves you money on the oil.
Yeah.
If you use the technology correctly, you will save 60% of your oil costs.
Think about that. That's amazing.
Yeah. And that's not us just pulling a figure out of thin air. That is now, we have scientifically proven and 60% of your oil will be saved.
And we sell oil.
Yeah.
Like, I love when people buy oil from our company, but I also, more than that, I love when restaurateurs are successful, and the more successful that they are is my main goal. So if they can use this device and clean their oil, produce better food product, and save money, I love it.
And let's take it back to its core as well, guys, from an environmental perspective. Why is this a brilliant thing?
Yeah.
Let's just call a spade a spade. Oil seeds are very detrimental to the environment. to the environment. They cause massive deforestation. The Amazon forest now emits more carbon than it takes in because it's being burnt to grow seed oil. Indigenous species are being displaced. Animals are being displaced. The water in South America is being destroyed. If we as a group, let's imagine in America, we said, let's reduce the use of oil by 30%.
Yeah.
We would reduce the global footprint just in that one task by 1%. The entire global footprint of the entire planet by 1%.
Mm-hmm.
So from a PR perspective, we all want to be environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
Now you can be environmentally friendly, but you can save money as well.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's not an
situation.
environmentally friendly. We're like, hey, we're serving on recyclable materials, but we're not really recycling it, or it's compost, but we're not really composting it. It's not a fugazi. It's actually a real.
When you take into account that for 1 liter of vegetable oil, just as an estimate, what do you believe the carbon footprint of that 1 liter of oil is?
Wouldn't even.
Yeah.
It's 5 kgs is the carbon footprint of 1 liter of oil. So you can imagine on a global stage how much carbon is being created just in the manufacture. Now, look, people will go, what about China doing coal and yada, yada, yada. Everybody has to do something small. If everybody does something small, we create our own ecosystem.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. It becomes a strong PR message, for our grandchildren. What we're doing is very small, but it's very, very effective.
Yeah.
There's a new thing called agroforestation, which is growing the crop within the forest. And we as a modern Western society, we need to start supporting those activities and educating people on the damage that it actually happens. And look, I am by no means an eco warrior. Right. I just want to do my bit. I have 2 grandchildren. The turning point for me was, I may not be here in 40 years, but they will.
Right.
So what's my legacy to these 2 grandchildren going to be? Am I going to continue? With Halcyon, it was all about profit. That's all it was. We'd our monthly management, and that's where we down. Was it profit? Was that? We now have a different role that we're following through.
Yeah.
And it's this environmentally friendly, making it easy access, which is why I could have gone out to the marketplace. I could have charged $20,000 for this technology, and I was told how crazy I was. But I had to make people understand that it wasn't a crusade, but it was a legacy act, that I had created something that played a small part in helping to change the future of the planet. And, if we could co-op a huge amount of restaurants together, I could reduce that machine by $2,000. Now we're leaving a real legacy return for all of us.
Sure.
I love the approachability for the local independent restaurant because it is doable. The henny penny $100,000 machine is it's not sustainable in anyone's budget and is not going to be done. But this device allows any restaurateur to get into cleaning their oil multiple times a week, reduce their spend on oil, and then actually increase the safety of their employees. So
when it really becomes it's a daily activity that's effortless.
Yeah.
I mean, we cleaned that fryer when we demoed it in 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah.
And that, if you remember, I think we took some pictures. We may or may not put those up on the website, but there was about a couple pounds of junk in the bottom of that fryer easily.
Yeah. I want to stop you there. I think the listeners are probably like blown away. It took us 5 minutes to clean a fryer that had not been cleaned
ever.
Weeks. We like to say weeks. There was some distance between the last cleaning. I think that's the technical term, since distance.
Yeah.
But
like when it was bought.
Yeah. when it was plugged in the first time. But that's the kind of revolutionary aspect of your device that, to me, and maybe we should have led with it, but that's the difference. Now you can do something that you absolutely know that in your kitchen needs to be done, that is probably not getting done or not getting done enough times, and change the quality of your food, change the spend that you have on oil, and make your staff safer.
Mhm.
Like those are three amazing things that your device does effortlessly. And it goes back to, and we've talked so much, you and I in the design and how you engineered it, but it goes back to all the heavy lifting you did on the front end, knowing the industry, knowing what people do to sidestep safety, knowing what actually happens in the kitchen versus, trying to pretend like, oh, you just take this thing and you roll it out to the parking lot and it's done. No, that's not how it works. People are going to be people. Your staff is not going to want to clean their oil except for with your device. And I think it's really cool.
And you have to remember as well, just on picking up what you were saying there, Brian, the world we live in, finding good quality stuff is extraordinarily difficult.
Very
extraordinarily difficult. People have lots of options. Now you're now being interviewed by a potential employee rather than you interviewing.
Right, sure. Yeah.
Sure. So when you take a reduction in man hours, if they use the technology correctly, they're going to increase their productivity by 7 hours a week. That's a whole day's work.
Yeah.
For that one member of staff.
Yeah.
To do,
Huge.
So that's a huge increase. And that's a huge cost saving as well, because now they're not paying that member of staff to clean a fire. And it's 80%.
And you have more compliance because they actually want to do it. I mean, I'm telling you, like it literally makes a horrible activity almost fun. I mean, it sounds crazy I'm saying this, but it does.
It changes that employee's mindset too, I believe. And maybe I'm putting too much into this, but if an employee doesn't want to come to work and knows that they have to clean the fryer, they are going to probably do a no call, no show.
But so instead of adding 7 hours, you lost.
And you still have dirty oil. Now, this is something that is just part of their job, and it's so effortless, it doesn't become the worst job in the kitchen anymore.
Yeah.
It's
but even not the worst job, but the most unsafe job.
Yeah.
As well. 70% of kitchen claims can be traced back somewhere to the oil in that fryer, either through a slippage or through a burn or through a flash point. Lots of different things. We had a customer in New York and we were watching their kitchen go on fire through their cameras because they had cleaned the fryer, they hadn't taken the water out, they let it up, their thermostat was broke on the fryer through constantly dropping heavy oil in on top of it, and it flashed. And it set the kitchen on fire. And that's a classic example. You're removing all that. And from the insurance company should be jumping on this. I saying, if you have our technology, your insurance company will give you a 20% rebate. Something like that.
And to be a good leader, the safety of your employees is so important.
Yeah.
Why, as an industry, is it a battle scar to have the burns on your arm? And we just take that for, that's just what you get when you're cleaning the fryer. It doesn't have to. And with your device, you eliminate the burns. Yeah. It's safe. Anyone can do it.
What other industry would you allow a member of your staff walk around with 300-degree oil in a metal pot?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist anywhere in the world, let alone now. Imagine if that member of staff slipped.
Yeah. It happens.
It happens.
Well, that restaurant is, they're going to lose their license. There's going to be a huge investigation. Health service will be all over the place. So it's not worth the risk just because you don't want to make a slight investment in a technology like this. So take on board your staff, their health and safety, let alone the cost savings and the environmental issues. Stop allowing your staff have burn marks going up their arm. That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
And when I go into a kitchen and they're laughing at me, showing it at me, inside I'm horrified.
Yeah.
Because any other industry, you'd be closed down straight away.
Yeah.
A kitchen porter walks up with these 16 little burn marks going up his arm for years of cleaning a fryer.
Right.
Nobody could name another industry where that would be acceptable.
No, that's very fair. Yeah.
And we're not saying, like the kitchen isn't work and there's, it is an amazing profession and it's difficult, but employee safety has to be tantamount, and it has to be on the forefront of all of our minds moving forward, because the staff is becoming harder and harder to find. It is so difficult to find an employee you want to honor that employee and keep them healthy and make sure that they're not getting burned, and that, that's, as an industry, how we're going to lose staff to other industries.
Yeah. Remember when it's already happened. It's happening every day. Yeah. So two things I want to make sure that we touch on before we wrap up is I want to talk about the app and how that, again, the user connects with the buyer.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how that works, and as an owner, like being able to keep on top of things.
Yeah. When I came up with the idea of the app, the one thing I didn't allow for was the cost of developing an app, because we needed to create our own microboards within the machine that would take a pulse from the handle, send that pulse down to the motor, switch on the motor. The board then and the motor will communicate with the SMS, which thus communicates with the app.
Right.
So the boards didn't exist. So we had to go off and we had to create these boards. We had to manufacture these boards, to allow that to happen. Even the cost of that was just eye-watering amounts of money. And that was just the boards before we even got the app where it was. But in all our research, we had owners saying to us, I love the machine, but my guy won't use it. So we had to very quickly come up with a way of overcoming that. Well, how can we make the owner be aware that the machine is being used? Also, from a rebate scheme, what reports can we give him? So when he's looking for an environmental rebate, he has everything at the touch of the button.
Everything, yeah.
That's where the app. So every time you press that button, that communicates with the board inside, that switches on the motor. The board beside the motor recognizes that the machine's on and sends the data. The board will also recognize how long the machine has been on for. So I can tell you, so someone can't just come up and press the button. I've used it.
You're like, check.
Yeah. And the app will flag anything like that. It'll flag when it's not used. It'll flag. On a Friday, the owner receives a push notification to say, your machine was used 3 times this week. You would have said you saved X. However, had it been used on the time it should have been used,
it would have been
saved X. And that's really for your multi-site operators. I have a customer that saved $250,000 in the last 12 months.
Wow.
$250,000.
What size operation is that?
6 hotels.
Okay.
6 hotels.
Yeah.
$250,000.
But that's 6 hotels.
And we're not talking about Hilton size hotels. You're talking about your standard. They have a kitchen, they have a restaurant, but they're and 1.3 million kgs in carbon.
Yeah.
And they have that as reports. So for their PR department, it's gold.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Gold.
For sure.
But their customers realize it. They go in there and the food quality is better because they're using this device.
Yeah.
And the overwhelming amount of technology that you put into this, the skeptics are going to say it's just a pump and a machine that cycles the oil through a filter. It is so much more than that with the technology that Peter and his team have engineered into this. And it's to me, it was amazing because you could have stopped at just making a device that cleans oil very well, but you didn't. You went that next step with all the things that the present day kitchen staff is going to need and the things that the owners want that really never had access to. You can have all the checklists you want. You can have all the SOPs you want, but if the oil is not being cleaned, you'll probably never know. But with your device, you'll know.
Absolutely. Yeah. It'll give you very detailed reports. But even to pick up there, even for us to develop that wireless switch, that took a huge amount of work, took a huge amount of investment to try and get those boards speaking to each other. Because the big challenge we had when we brought in an alien frequency, it would switch the machine on. Because it's a wireless technology. So we had to overcome.
And overcome, I think, is the right word, because as you go down through these things, you're like, you could have said, okay, that's difficult. We're going to abandon that idea and not do it. Or we're not going to, or maybe the app isn't going to work with this, but you kept going and you overcome it to get to the end result. You didn't give up.
There's one word, and for any young entrepreneur out there, I often get asked, what's the most important attribute to being an entrepreneur? And it's perseverance.
Yeah, no question.
You are going to hit that many roadblocks in your entrepreneurial career. If you don't have the ability to just persevere and keep going, you're never going to achieve it. And that's what we were experts at. We were experts at that perseverance.
Yeah,
we had an
I see it.
idea. How do we bring it to fruition?
Yep.
Now, just remember, we didn't go out to the marketplace looking for investment. You know, we used our own resources, you know, so we've built this whole global company based on the foundation of the Halcyon brand.
Yeah.
Back in Ireland, but everything we had to overcome was, you know, from the motor heating up, you know, how do we stop the sides heating up? You know, so inside there's a heat protector inside that stops the sides heating up. You know, how do we stop the doors from melting? You know, we had to use a high quality, high temperature plastic to be able to do it. You know, even funny stuff would be, when I started this, my whole background was service industry. You know, I knew nothing about manufacturing, and I realized that I needed to find someone who did know stuff about manufacturing when $120,000 bill for molds dropped on my desk, and it was the mold for the door. Of course, I had no idea that I thought plastic was plastic.
Yeah.
It just arrived.
Yeah.
But I had no idea of the cost of molds. Yeah. And that's when I went out to the marketplace and I found a team that understood manufacturing, because I found out very quickly that I had my clue.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the money aspect of it, like Brian and I always joke, we have two different people that listen to Restauratopia because we're all about the local restaurant operators. We either have local restaurant operators or people working in the local restaurant business, or we have what we call national chain hostages. Yeah. You know, they just haven't broke away from that. But all great people working in industry. So when we say $6,000, now, of course, versus $50, $60, $70, $100,000, you know, henny penny and things like that. But even at $6,000, you still came up with some ways to make it approachable with the financing. Can you talk through that just real quick? Like what a program looks like to get into this?
Look, even though we believe $6,000 is a big capital investment, if you're a small restaurant, that's a significant amount.
For sure. Yeah.
You know, so the question for us is, how do we make your point of entry easy? So we went to and because it's a specialist machine, financing it is quite difficult. Because it's specialist, you know, finance companies say, well, if I take it back, who am I going to sell to? So it's a highly specialist. So we approached a finance company. We cut a deal with them. So now for $100 a month, you can own the machine.
$100 a month.
$100.
Yeah. I think of what you spend at your restaurant that costs $100 a month that provides no value. If my sales pitch is just, I can make cleaning the oil easier for your staff, safer, and save you money on the oil, and it's only $100. Like I'm buying that all day long.
Yeah.
But even if I came to you and I said, look, forget about the environmental stuff, forget about the cost savings. From a health and safety perspective, it's going to cost you $100.
Right.
You know, even at that stage, you should be going.
Yeah.
You know, if I look around my kitchen, you know, if you go to a bin in a kitchen, there's $100 worth of waste sitting in that bin.
Yeah, sure.
You know,
for sure.
The wastage is phenomenal. So we've worked it out that at $100 a month, you only need to be saving probably 50, 60 pounds of oil a month to get a return on your investment immediately.
Yeah.
You know, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
It absolutely makes sense.
No question.
And, you know, we're because we're trying to create a legacy here as well for customers who can't get credit. You know, we have done our own deals with lots of guys here in the United States, you know, where they're passionate about the machine. We can see their passion, you know, so we more or less say, okay, well, look, we'll self-finance the machine for you. So there's always a way to get the technology into the kitchen. It's getting them to buy into the concept of, you know, what I'm doing isn't the best. I could be better. I can embrace this technology. Right. You know, from an environmental perspective, I'm doing a little bit, even down to the stage we've created a little counter that sits on their counter. And every time they filter their oil, it shows how much kgs of carbon they're saving.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, so when a customer walks in, and it'll have a little note, we use an oil filtration system, so the customer will know straight away. And again, very small, but a very effective PR.
Sure.
Yeah. And the customer knows when they eat the food.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If it's going to make sense. Like
for $100 a month to say that you're going to have better food is $100 spent better than any marketing campaign, anything that you could do, because the customer is going to have a great experience culinarily with your food and want to come back.
Yeah.
And knowing that you have that consistency with clean oil is going to provide a better food product. And that's really the most important thing here.
And you know as well as I do, Brian, that you can have the most expensive establishment you want. People will always remember bad food.
Yeah. Always, yeah.
Yeah, always remember. They'll never talk about how clean your toilets were or how much investment you'd made in the chairs. If the food is bad, they will just say, well,
doesn't matter,
and I'm not going back.
And the fryer is the one thing in that kitchen that the customer's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
They're going to know it. They may not know that it was a dirty fryer, but they knew the food quality was a bad.
Yeah, for sure.
And look, we've been in places, you know.
We all have. Yeah, right.
Even the owners, unfortunately, aren't aware of what's going on in their kitchen.
Yeah.
You know, I've had owners when we've been demoing the machine, like, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but even you didn't know what was going on in your own fryer.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because it's there, it's out of the way, I never need to see it, someone else worries about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then when you enter the oil and they see what's going into the machine, that's not just from yesterday.
Yeah.
That's weeks.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and I keep going back to the same statement. You are feeding your customers food that you cooked in that fryer, cooked. I bet you they love me saying that here.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. It rolls off the tongue.
That you were serving to other people too.
Yeah.
So,
and this is, to me, if you're a 2-3 unit operator, this is vital for your operation because it really allows you to be in multiple locations at once. We all have the cameras. We all have the technology. We get the reports off the point of sale system. But the way Peter has engineered this device to make it multi-unit friendly, but not you have to be, some ginormous Bloomin' Brands type organization to execute on this strategy. You can be a 3-unit operator and have this device in your restaurant and really change your operation to a level that it to me, that's why I'm so excited. I'm just shocked on how ingenious the device is.
Yeah. And even on the disposal of the oil, guys, you know, the smallest person in the kitchen can now dispose of oil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, they lock the machine down, they reel it out to their waist, they switch on the pump, and it empties
right
straight
out.
You know, the days of having to get the biggest guy in there to lift a pan, you know, bring it out. You know, the majority of the entry points in our waste disposal are at the top. You know, so it's archaic in the way that it's still being done, and still being done in probably 70% of establishments globally.
Mm-hmm. I'd say even more.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing on a weekly basis when I'm in a customer's kitchen is, and again, we have great operators.
Yeah.
It is definitely the worst part of any kitchen staff's job.
Yeah.
Okay, this was awesome, man, Peter.
No,
so thank you so much for coming in and talking about this a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, we really appreciate you. We think this is something, you know, we're you know, Brian and I are very passionate about getting out because this is the first time in a long time I think I've been excited about a restaurant product and technology that somebody can use. It's a no-brainer. The cost savings, the safety, the quality of the food, it hits all the different angles. You've done an amazing job of putting that all together. You know, we're going to have all the information on the show notes. We even link a little demo in there so you can see it, but you know, website information where you can get in touch with Peter and his team. You guys are coming into the U.S. in the Ohio market starting, trying to grow it. So
we're looking for all the support we can get.
Yeah.
You know, our plan is to dominate the US marketplace, you know, and work with small co-ops to create some level of legacy. We're all making that small change that needs to be made.
No, we love it. Peter, thank you so much for being here, man.
Very welcome.
We appreciate you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.